Welcome to Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, break down the process, and meet others who've done it so you can leap into your own story. We interview amazing guests who provide powerful insights that inspire you to get your story told. Be sure to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com, and while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media network. Now sit back, get ready to take some notes, and let's get started. This episode of Leap Into Your Story podcast is brought to you by Leap Into Your Story course. Visit leapintoyourstory.com, where you have a guide to get your story told. I'm Victoria Anderson, and welcome to Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, work through the process, and meet others who've done it. We interview amazing guests who provide powerful insights that will inspire you to leap into your own story. So be sure to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com. And while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media networks. So let's get started. In this episode, we're going to find out about imagining a second chance for humanity. My guest today is Laura Ramnarace. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Ramnarace, yeah.
Thank you.
It's a tough one.
Thank you. In addition to writing, she's a mediator and educator. She also hosts the show Resilient Voices for KURU Radio, based out of Silver City, New Mexico. So Laura, welcome and thanks for joining us today. So let us know a little bit more about yourself and your writing journey.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my writing journey. Well, my earliest thought of being an author was when I was about 10, and one of my teachers had us all write a little story and then had us make a cover with fabric and cardboard and stuff. And that was the first time that I realized that writers are actual people, that it's a thing that people do, because I've always loved books and reading. But it seemed like this sort of magical thing that just happened. But I really didn't do much with it. I mean, I've always written, here and there. Of course, I had to do writing for school and whatnot as I got older. But I never explored the territory of fiction before until the first story that I wrote was actually one that I have not published because, frankly, it wasn't that good, but it was great practice. And it was that story, as well as this, the Sung Home trilogy that we're here about, came from a place of just something I needed to see in the world. So the first book that I wrote that I didn't publish was about a situation where I had heard about a mining thing that was going to happen on this indigenous land. And I just felt really upset about it and wanted to imagine a way through that, and wrote a whole story imagining people responding to that. And then this story, Sung Home, the Sung Home series. So this is the first book, Sung Home. Came about because I was going through a period of just feeling really overwhelmed by all the horrible things that are happening in the world, the killings of people by police, and climate change that it seems like we're not really getting a grip on, missing and murdered Indigenous women, et cetera, et cetera. And it just seems like there is so much happening and it's all so important. What do we do about it? And although I've really enjoyed a lot of the dystopian series, like the Hunger Games and Allegiant and some of those and some of the older ones, Handmaid's Tale and whatnot. What I needed was a story of surviving and thriving after societal collapse. And really, it became, I started writing out of a need just for my own mental health, my ability to function. And then I got more and more into the story, and it kept expanding. And that became Sung Home. I thought it was just going to be a little, like a short story or at the most a novella. But then that world and the characters and the specific things that they were doing to survive this terrible situation that they're in kept growing. I became more engaged imaginatively, started looking things up, and really it's pretty amazing to realize we actually have everything that we need to survive even a terrible catastrophe like I describe in the stories. And so I'm sure most of your listeners haven't read my book. So it starts off with a story with a young woman who is escaping a compound where she's been held captive after society has collapsed on the heels of, coincidentally, a worldwide pandemic. Now, the funny thing is that Sung Home was published in July of 2019. And I started the writing years before that. And it was just kind of an amazing coincidence to have COVID show up a few months later. But anyway, so this young woman, uses a song that her mother sang to her to get herself to her grandmother's home. And the song is a songline that's based, if you are familiar with the work of Bruce Chatwin, he wrote a book called Songlines, and it was based on the cultural feature in Australian Aboriginal cultures of using songs as maps so that somebody could learn a song, say, from a grandparent. And maybe that grandparent had never gone to that place, but by singing that song, they could make their way through the landscape to this place, maybe hundreds of miles away. And I was fascinated by that when I read the book a long time ago. And so I incorporated that into it. And then it just sort of took off from there.
Wow, that's quite the journey. So that kind of dives into the question I was going to have you is where do you draw your inspiration? So is it, ancient cultures, or is it out of the current turmoil? So where specifically, where's the pool that really kind of sparks you to write these series?
Yeah, well, the details of the stories come from just things I've encountered in life, things I've learned, things I've experienced. So, for instance, in the stories, this main character, Lakshmi, uses skills that she learned from her father, and they're wilderness living skills. And that came from a time when I was in my 20s and spent a lot of time with people who were teachers of primitive living skills, fire by friction and tracking and temporary shelter building, finding water, that kind of stuff. And I never got into it enough to be any good at any of it, but I learned about it. And so I brought that into this story. Another thing was, so in the stories, there's these caves where people are living. And it brings up images of, the grunting, hairy guy and, the dirt on the ground and it's all rocky and stuff like that. But the inspiration for their actual homes, which are beautiful, came from an experience I had a long time ago when I was living in Santa Fe, and I was having just a hard time in my life right then. And my boyfriend at the time said, "You know what? We're going to take tomorrow off, and there's someplace I'm going to take you." And what happened, he wouldn't tell me where we were going, but he drove us up to Embudo Station, up along the highway to Taos, and pulled off and took me first through some farmland that was right by the river, and then straight out into the desert. And there was nothing out there. There was this little light path that apparently people had been walking upon, but that's it. And after we had been walking for a long time, he stopped and looked around and said, "Do you notice anything?" And I'm really unobservant out in the wilderness. I'm just not. And I saw something that just struck me so oddly. And it was a piece of round plexiglass just set in the side of this hill, which didn't make any sense to me. And he looked at me and nodded and walked me around the side of the hill. And there was a door set in the side of the hill. It was like a hobbit door. Opened it up, and we walked into this hill that had been carved by this sculptor called Ra Paulette. He's from the Embudo Dixon area, and he has, if you Google him, just Ra, R-A, Paulette Caves. If you do a Google image search, you are going to be blown away by what you find. And that was my inspiration for the homes that this one group of people are living in, because it was gorgeously carved, comfortable, serene. So that's where that inspiration came from. So it's really just a lifetime of this experience and that experience. And I just think, oh, maybe there's something I could do with that. Maybe that could fit into the story.
Wow. Yes. I know there's, I think, a misconception about ancient times and primitive, that they think that they're just very plain and blah and every day is just a focus, but they really capture beauty around them. And in a little way, we should be a little envious. Is our brick and mortar homes aren't anything compared to the landscape of the beauty of nature.
Yes. And there's this myth, I think, this mythology that is contained in a lot of the dystopian stories. And that is the idea that if we no longer had everything, all of the modern things that we have now in the big cities and, everything like that, that life would be really grim and miserable and deprived. And, that's not really true. I mean, ancient civilizations, there's amazing cities that were built, and people live these beautiful lives without all of this intense technology. And I'm not anti-technology. It's just, I want people to imagine things being really good, maybe with a combination of old knowledge and new knowledge, because in the stories there are, technological things that people use to sort of live better and more lightly at the same time.
Well, that kind of ties into my next question I was going to ask you, which is what is it about post-apocalyptic scenarios that drive you to writing about that?
Yeah, I think it's just because I'm so worried that that's what we're going to end up with. And I need to believe, I have a strong desire, strong need to believe that there's a way through it for humanity. And it's not because I'm sure that that's true. It's because I really want that to be true. And if we can imagine something, maybe we can create it. And in fact, we can't create anything that we don't even try to imagine. And that is true, throughout history, and including all of our technological advances and art. Art has changed over, the millennia. too. There's this evolution in imagination, and it changes how we are in the world and what we imagine to be possible, what we understand to be possible.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a little curious. Your main character, is there parts of you in her or things about her you wish you could be?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's probably a really common thing. Um, for one, being, 16 again and having that set of skills that she does in the story would be pretty cool. But yeah, I'm mixed race, South Asian and European ancestry. And so I kind of insert that into her background a little bit. She's got an Indian grandmother that's referred to, but it doesn't show up in her that much. So in terms of how she looks. But so there's that. And yes, in some ways she's like I wish I were more, which is very, so resourceful and strong and capable. And I really like to, project that image out there for young women. I want young women to be able to see themselves that way. When I was young, there were very few stories of young women who were capable. They were always sort of like the girlfriend, or whatever of the character who was really interesting and that kind of thing. And that's changed a lot, thank goodness, over the decades. And I'm really happy to be a part of that.
Nice. Yes, I agree. I think the big story or the big genre out there, and of course I'm dating myself, was like the Nancy Drew series.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And still there was a lot of focus on, boys and looking
Yeah.
pretty and stuff like that. Yes, but I'm sure that's why those books were so loved. I mean, besides being good stories, that girls were drawn to characters that were strong and capable.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your series and what are some of the main messages of your story, like key um, ahas that you would like to have your readers expect and experience in them? What are they? What are those underlining messages?
I think one of the underlying messages is that we can create a better world. We can create a better life. We can deal with the very real challenges because the books are not all just happiness and joy, even though I want them to be ultimately optimistic and positive. They also contain a lot of genuine uh, obstacles, struggles for individuals and for the communities that are depicted. And it's struggle. So I come a lot at these stories from a perspective of a social scientist because I am one. I have a master's degree in conflict resolution. I've been working for more than 20 years doing conflict resolution work, including mediation, including educating people about human behavior and how to develop the skills to do that better. And what I know is that truly in the face of catastrophe, and history tells us this also, that there's always going to be some people who lose it in a really bad way and cause harm and commit violence and take advantage of the situation in a really selfish manner. But most people really want to help make things better for everybody. They want to figure out how to keep people fed and housed and safe. And that's reality. that is what humans are more likely to do. So I kind of feel discouraged by, some of the stories that show just death and destruction after some kind of, calamity has hit humanity. Because that's actually not realistic. We know from the thousands of years of history that people try to pull it together and try to help each other.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think what comes out of some of the horrific stuff is the amazing humanity stories of courage where ordinary people have been catapulted into extraordinary situations, and they themselves come sometimes out of it realizing, I didn't think I had it in me. Which brings me to my next question, about, I know you had mentioned you kind of had written the books as therapy of some sort, but what was something that you discovered about yourself after you've written these books that you didn't realize before?
Oh, that's a great question. I realized that I could take on a huge writing project and pull it off. I mean, the longest thing I'd ever written before was maybe a 30-page paper, or actually my master's capstone project was the longest. But that's different, right? To me, writing nonfiction is easier than writing fiction. So, and I realized how much fun it is to lose yourself in a story of your own creation, because then you can have it do anything. When you're reading someone else's book, and I've been a reader my whole life, you're getting pulled along with their vision and their sense of what's interesting and fun. So it's really fun, and it's a tremendous amount of work. I mean, anybody who imagines that they would like to be a writer, really, I would say you have to really like that process. You have to enjoy that process. It has to feel at least like a certain amount of fun. It can't be just work, or you're never going to get there. And there's no reason you should. Just find something else to do that you really do love doing, because there's lots of things to be done in life.
I agree. Yes, I know that whole entire feeling of a big project. I actually started out doing fiction, and then I was kind of drawn to tell my story. And my story now covers 3 books.
Wow.
The big joke, running joke that you'll see throughout my podcast is I don't write the memoir. I write the memoir series. And
that's fabulous.
Yes, and thank you. And my first book, Touched, was 500 pages originally. But when I signed on with a publisher, they're like way too much. So it's been chopped down. They had chopped down, and then they went belly up. So I had to kind of cut and paste and patch things of what their editor did, my own, worked with another editor on my own, and whittled it down to 330 pages. But then it created another book, which was again close to 300 pages, which is The Trial by Fire. And by the final book, which is Mastering the Paradox, that's a whole whopping 157.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And
yeah.
now I'm having questions for you.
Oh.
It sounds like you had it come in pieces, and they all kind of have their own theme.
They do. Well, my mind really kind of I've lived many lives. So, I came out of the corporate world. I've been international ceramic artist, writer, real estate, now podcast host, teaching courses. So yes, it's just kind of evolved into different journeys, but they all ended up the same. They landed in the same spot. Goes back to writing, which is something I always had been passionate about. And even though I've started out in fiction, you've never seen any of my fiction books because I had just given up on them. I didn't think that there was any real, anything potentially for me. So the nonfiction books have made me revisit some of the storylines. And so those will be out in the fall.
Wow, that's exciting. Yeah, and there's something that you're describing, I think, that I really relate to, and that is sort of following your nose, following your inspiration. I mean, I've done a lot of different things in my life, not necessarily for money per se or whatever, but I'm really drawn to learning different skills. So I do a lot of stuff with my hands. For instance, I've done tons of beadwork, stained glass tile, mosaic. I made books, like little blank books with handmade covers and everything too. Loads of stuff like that. I worked in the nonprofit world, and also, I have my job as a mediator for the state right now. But writing, I'm experiencing much like another kind of craft project. It's got a lot of the same elements in it. Yeah, my process is that I start off with an idea and I start writing it, and then as I'm going, I'll think, oh, now wait a minute, maybe it should go this way, this would be better, and then I have to back up and rewrite some of the earlier stuff so that it lines up with the new idea and all. So I'm more in process than plotting everything out ahead of time, and that's true with all of my crafts stuff that I do as well.
Well, things evolve. Like you might do an outline, but when you dive into the story, or and I've even noticed that with just writing memoir or nonfiction. Even I've done corporate training manuals, and sometimes you just discover a better way to tell your story, your process that you never thought about, and it just evolves in the work.
Yeah, it kind of drives me crazy, but I have to go with it. I'll be lying there, drifting off to sleep at the end of a long day, totally happy about going to sleep, and my mind will go to some part of the story that I'm working on, and then some other idea comes. And sometimes it's whole chunks of dialogue or a whole scene. It just pops up alive. And I have to get up and write it down, because if I don't, I forget it. The next day I'm like, oh, I remember vaguely having an idea, and that's it. And so I don't know, it's just sort of the mysterious, kind of wonderful, sometimes torturous process of creativity. Yeah.
Yes, I am notorious for getting my best insights while I'm busy doing something else. All the time.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, there's a lot of, the mind is a funny thing. If you over focus on something, it doesn't like that. But if you plant enough seeds and then go work on another part of the garden, that where you're like, I'm giving up, I've nurtured it, I've put the water, I've put the fertilizer, nothing's blooming, I'm just going to go try something else. And then no sooner you do that, you start seeing budding coming up. I call it budding.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. We got to give it a little bit of space.
And it has to digest, process, manifest, bloom. I don't know if there's something about that. And some of I would say a good chunk of my books, well, I wouldn't say not books, but I would definitely say book 2, I was working a job that paid me so well, but I just hated every breathing moment of it. And the more I couldn't stand being there, the more it was like a volcano eruption of where I wanted to take that book. I almost couldn't even take it down fast. I had to keep a spiral notebook with me all the time just to try to keep up with what was flowing out. And I realize now I don't have to work, because somewhere I had programmed that if you're miserable, it seems seem to be more creative. And I had to change that mindset. So now I just understand that for me, I now just work multiple projects. And to take the energy off too much of focus where it almost smothers it, give it some airtime, right? Let it seed, all the seeding, watering, and fertilizing. Let it do its thing. Don't go back and try to undo the seedlings, and just work on something else. And then sure enough, it'll come up and manifest what I feel is a better way to tell that story, or create a character that's needed in, say, a fiction one. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of keeping either dictation. I like to write stuff down, but even in my courses, I'll have a section about the mindset and be prepared for that burst of creativity, because once you wait until you sit down and try to write it out, it's going to be gone. You got to capture it in the moment.
Oh yeah, I do that. I have a notebook on my bed also that I'll just write a note. If I just have an idea, that's not really fleshed out, I'll make a note of it there. Yeah. I think you're right. I think the subconscious is really powerful that way. If we give it a job to do, but don't keep looking over its shoulder all the time, it can just pop up stuff for us.
If you think about it, nobody likes to be micromanaged. So not in the conscious world usually. Yeah. So that makes a whole lot of sense for the unconscious world too. Nobody likes a micromanager. Even for a good cause, nobody likes micromanaging.
I think for me anyway, my conscious mind is more rigid or limited in terms of, how things should be done. If my conscious mind were the one in charge of everything would just come out more brittle and stiff and like that. So it's a good team, the conscious and subconscious mind. But the subconscious mind is where the real rich stuff comes from. And then the conscious mind is the one that says, okay, I'm going to write from 2 to 4 today, and sit down and just do that.
I can try, but it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Usually when I try to time block, I'll edit instead of actually writing, because the creative spurt just happens to come and go as it pleases. But at sometimes, and I had a conversation with one of my other guests, so we talked about where the creative process is the left side of the brain, and then the editing is the right side of the opposite. The right side is the left, and the left is which one. I think it's the left brain that's the creative, and the right side that's the logical, the editor. So
yeah, it's a different part of your brain. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think, there was somebody who was recently asking me about, my writing process and stuff, and she's a new writer. And once I first really got into this, I started watching a lot of YouTube videos on writing, do's and don'ts, and interviews with famous authors and stuff like that. And there's, good advice out there, but really the bottom line is that everybody has their own process. And so I found that if I try some of the things that some of these other people have described, sometimes it's helpful for me and sometimes it's just not. And because there's a big thing out there that you have to write every single day. And I don't need to. I need to write consistently. It makes a big difference, I should say, if I write pretty consistently, like I'm kind of in this groove, even if it's kind of in the back of my mind while I'm doing all my other stuff. Um, but yeah, and maybe that's part of the process. The internal process is learning for myself what really works for me and what doesn't. And I don't think there's just one little rule book for everybody.
I agreed. Yeah, I try to encourage those to at least what I call touch their writing every day. So if you try to get maybe a few words, a few sentences, edit what you've already done a little bit, think about ideas. I think that's, I find that's what works for me. That may or may not work for everybody, but just like anything else, if you do a little bit every day, you're going to see big results.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that consistency is important. And I like what you're saying about, that it doesn't all have to be sitting down and writing new paragraphs and stuff. Sometimes it can be actually right now what I'm doing, I'm working on book number 3. I'm about halfway through the first draft. And I had some ideas, of something I wanted to infuse through the chapters that I've already written. And so I'm going back and just taking it like one paragraph at a time and just trying to relax into it. I think definitely getting anxious about it doesn't help.
Right.
Paradoxically, it's like the more that I really feel like I want to get something right, that it just makes it harder. So
it is. And for me, I always joke about, I think I need the 12-step program to stop editing because I encourage in my courses to just do an info dump, but it's probably, I need to let that settle in. And I've done that for many years as a writer for 20 years, but sometimes I'll look at something and the word is not wrong, but certainly words carry a better impact. So there's days where I just go in there and just check my words. I may not just write, or necessarily edit. I mean, it's still in the editing vein that I need to let up about, but I'll just check to feel into those words to see if those are the right word choices that match the impact I want to do in that sentence.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So every time I reread a piece, a section, there'll be those kind of details will pop out for me. And I'll be like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. And like you said, it's not a wrong sentence. It's just, I think, oh, if I use this word instead, that'll convey more of the feeling that I'm trying to convey here. Yeah.
Right. And especially if you're writing about certain emotionally charged or trauma scenarios, the right word choice can just excel the reader to the next level.
Yeah, it can make a powerful difference for sure. Yeah.
Yes. So it looks like we talked about a little bit of our little secret tips that we recommend, and what I want to dive into a little bit more about maybe some tips that you can provide to our listeners who are interested in maybe doing the dystopic or the apocalyptic books. What are some of the tips that young or new or even seasoned authors who might want to explore that genre? What can you suggest as some tips to help with those stories?
Well, I think, and I don't know that this is particular to dystopian work, but thinking about the kind of world you're creating, and maybe doing a little background research. If you want to include technology, maybe new technologies, go and look up some stuff on emerging technologies. What is out there that the scientists are thinking, okay, we don't have this yet, but we think it can be done, for instance. And also, definitely, wherever you're setting your story, if it's a real place that actually exists, really find out about that place. It really is better, I think, to use places that you're familiar with. A friend of mine was just telling me about reading a story that was set in the Silver City area. I'm in the Silver City area of the Gila. And she said it wasn't at all like it is here. And I just thought, well, why would you do that? Why would you set a story someplace that you're not familiar with, Yeah. So I don't know. If you have any more specific questions, I can certainly try to answer those.
Well, so basically, maybe sticking to or starting with writing with what you're familiar with. What about any tips that you have found to be helpful, say, when you were getting started, that you would recommend to other authors?
Gosh. Be kind to yourself. Come up with a plan of action, maybe like you said, like writing every day or attending in some way to your writing, maybe not every day, but really consistently. Maybe mark it on a calendar, make a commitment to that. And let go of the idea that you have to write the best thing ever written. I mean, even if it's not your first thing, because our first things are not usually that great. It's like, for me, my first novel, the one that I didn't publish, was a practice novel. And I spent hundreds of hours on that. I spent years playing with it. And I mean, it only took me maybe 6 months to write the first draft, but then I kept reworking. I developed the skills of writing. There's no substitute for practicing the skills of writing. And there's some things that I think will come, more easily, certain aspects of it. Maybe some of us are really good at dialogue, and some of us are really good at description, and some of us are good at, plotting in a way that is really strategic. But you kind of need all of those skills. So just notice what feels really good and easy to you and enjoy that. And, maybe make a commitment to developing the areas that that you struggle with. One of my things, especially with my first book, was I had way too many characters. I had just a zillion characters, and I didn't understand about how to bring just some characters, the main characters, more into focus and have the other characters be more in the background. And so that, that difference in focus is important. So it's something, it doesn't feel easy to me. I'm constantly, fretting about, about that. So there's a few ideas.
Okay, so just to recap, talking about writing what you know. Be kind to yourself while you are in the process. Be committed to your writing journey, and have realistic expectations, and also just continuously improve areas maybe where you struggle, whether it be dialogue or characters. And lastly, enjoy the journey. Did I get them all?
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I should write that down for future reference for myself.
Well, I'm going to capture those out on the social media platform, so I'll blast those out. So if you miss them, or if you want, you can, when this airs, you can certainly write those down as well for yourself. But
thank you.
Those are great tips, and I'll be sure to share them on our social media with your is Laura's tips for success in writing. How's that?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, it brings me to my final question. And where can we find more about you? Where are your books? Do you have a website that our readers can go to find out more?
You know, I don't have a website yet, and I am thinking seriously about doing that. I'm a little bit slow on jumping into that stuff because I like the writing part the best. But I do have a Facebook page, and it's called Sung Home. And my books can be found, of course, on Amazon, but also there's a bookstore in Silver City, if you're local to the area, called O'Keefe's Bookstore that has my books. And you can get them from me directly. I'll just mail them out to you. My email address is LRAMNARACE@gmail.com. So there's Opposite Books in Santa Fe also has my books, and Organic Books in Albuquerque, and there's another one that I'm forgetting.
So you have your books locally in New Mexico. So that's nice. You have small mom and pop local business bookstore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I didn't realize there was a whole lot list of them. I'm going to have to explore.
There's some great small bookstores in New Mexico. Albuquerque has several. Santa Fe has at least a couple. Taos, Silver City. Those are the places I'm most familiar with, and I'm sure there's others.
Well, I've heard of them, but I haven't heard of these, so I'm a little surprised. I'm going to research those as well, and maybe I can post that on the website, on my website, for readers who are local to check out some local business as well.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, Laura, it's been a pleasure to interview today, and I want to thank you for joining us. And for our readers and listeners, thank you for tuning in to Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, work through the process, and meet others who've done it so you can be guided to your journey to writing your own story. Remember to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. And again, while you're there, subscribe and like us via your favorite social media networks. We're looking forward to seeing you next time here on the Leap Into Your Story podcast. Thank you for tuning into the Leap Into Your Story podcast, where you discover your inner story, break down the process, and meet others who've done it so you can leap into your own story. Remember to visit our website at leapintoyourstory.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're there, subscribe and like to us via your favorite social media network. We're looking forward to seeing you next time on the Leap Into Your Story podcast.